DMT is an intense, naturally occurring psychedelic that's been taken for centuries. The drug is typically used via inhalation or is taken orally in the form of ayahuasca-like preparations. Although it's not as popular as LSD or psilocybin, it is a widely discussed and used psychedelic. DMT is also present endogenously in the human body. As always, there will be more information and links to references on thedrugclassroom.com, which you can find using the link below. Among the potential positive effects are closed and open eye visuals, spiritual or otherwise meaningful experiences, euphoria, mood lift, and auditory hallucinations. The negative effects can include increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, fear, anxiety, and paranoia. Although I won't fully discuss ayahuasca here, it does come with some other common effects that may be considered negative, such as vomiting, diarrhea, and nausea. DMT's effects depend on the dose, though the vast majority of attention is given to its peak effects. At low doses, it might provide some mood effects, such as anxiolysis and mood elevation. These doses typically aren't very hallucinogenic, but they can lead to objects vibrating, items becoming more colorful, and the appearance of slight geometric patterns. More complete doses come with effects that are highly variable between users, but some parts of the experience can be placed into typical groups. Multiple proposals have been made regarding how to group the effects and experiences. One commonality between them is that the lowest or initial stage of an experience contains colorful geometry of increasing prominence in the visual field and behind closed eyes. A step up from this is the progression to being immersed in what seems like a different world. Sometimes a further peak experience of white light and euphoria is obtained, although the immersion into another world is the most commonly discussed experience. Depending on dose and individual response, you may only reach the initial stage. Although you can group the effects, the actual contents of a full immersive experience differ between users. Here are some of the common elements. A full replacement of normal reality with an alternate universe. The universe can include visual objects and even seemingly sentient, intelligent, or powerful entities that sometimes interact with the user. Regardless of eyes being closed or open, there is rapidly changing kaleidoscopic imagery. A feeling of euphoria is often present following an initial period of anxiety. Some users report laughter, calmness, or a feeling of joy, although it's possible to experience significant anxiety and fear during the experience. And other users don't report any discernible feelings during the peak effects. There's also a dissociation from the body and, when your eyes are closed in particular, a disconnection from normal reality. This can mean no longer feeling your body, and sometimes at least a partial disconnection from self occurs as well. Disconnecting from yourself or your mind may include an absence of thoughts or a temporary lack of personal memories. Lastly, another common element is that people report the experience feels as real or more real than normal reality or dreaming. Not all of these effects appear for everyone, but there are a general outline of a full DMT experience. There is also a pretty typical progression of the experience with a full dose. Initially, there's a rush phase, during which you may feel disoriented and like you're being rocketed to a new location. Your head may feel like it's intensely vibrating. This can be accompanied by a sound, usually of a high pitch, such as a whine. This initial period is often filled with transient anxiety, brought on by the intensity of the effect. The rush progresses towards a detachment or dissociation from the body and normal reality. People sometimes remain partly connected to normal reality with their eyes open, depending on the dose. The rush is followed either by a full breakthrough experience or first by a brief waiting period. When the waiting period is present, which it isn't for everyone, it may be filled with colors and a sense that an experience is about to unfold. Users can feel like they're moving, such as heading down a tunnel, and the internal feeling and progression is sometimes described like that of a roller coaster. When it comes to the contents of a full experience, it's difficult to give a description. As was previously noted, there are often impressive geometric patterns and incredibly bright or intense colors. There can also be non-Earth landscapes and environments. Euphoria is a common feeling, along with a sense of wonder, amazement, and confusion. A few general categories for the type of experiences someone can have were put forth by Rick Strassman, who carried out DMT research. The first is personal, which are experiences based around around personal issues, which might be difficult to accept. The second is transpersonal, which are novel experiences in terms of quality and intensity, but they have some basis in the subject's previous experience. Mystical and near-death type experiences may be grouped in this category. And the third is invisible worlds, which involve encounters with autonomous, freestanding realities seemingly inhabited by alien beings capable of interaction. Strassman reported that around half of volunteers receiving a high dose of DMT reported an invisible worlds experience at least once. Just to give an idea of the range of things witnessed during the experiences, people have reported everything from high-tech machine-like objects to a ballroom with crystal chandeliers to circus imagery. A key component of many experiences is ineffability, or the inability to describe the effects with language. Not only can people struggle to impart their experiences onto others, they themselves may recall just a small portion of what was experienced. This is often because there's an overwhelming amount of data in the form of feelings or visual perception. Entities are clearly an interesting part of the experience. They don't always appear, and many people use DMT without encountering them, but they are frequently reported. Again, there's massive variation. People come back describing the entities as elves, spirits, gods, dwarfs, reptiles, insects, mantises, stick figures, and sometimes just an unseen but felt presence. Those descriptions typically aren't meant to be precise. For example, if someone describes elves, that's largely due to it being the best available term. It's not because the elves people usually think of are actually what was seen. These things may interact in the form of welcoming the user, laughing, or seemingly imparting some form of wisdom. They may also just probe or examine the user, and sometimes they don't even acknowledge the user. Although the entities are more often described as benign and even helpful, they can sometimes be persecutory and antagonistic. Users tend to have the feeling that these beings are not a part of themselves, but this may very well just be a feeling. While people are under the influence, they usually don't move much or at all. Sometimes deep breathing is present, the user's mouth may be partly open, and there can be REM-like movements behind the eyelids. The main acute negative psychological effects are anxiety and confusion. Paranoia, including feeling like you or others are being controlled by an outside force, is also sometimes encountered. These effects normally fade away quickly, but you should definitely be cautious when it comes to using the drug. Ayahuasca will be fully explored in a separate video, but since DMT is a key component of it, I'll briefly mention it. The term traditionally refers to Banisteriopsis caapi, though it's come to refer to a brew made up of caapi and Psychotria viridis, which contains DMT. Using it orally lengthens the effect to 3 to 4 hours and reduces the peak intensity and ineffability, although it can still be a very intense effect, and it may be even more intense in terms of the emotional and psychological impact. Some medical applications for DMT have been explored. Much of the data involves ayahuasca, which complicates matters. 3 areas where DMT or ayahuasca may have some efficacy are depression, anxiety, and addiction, but there's relatively little research in all of those cases. It's worth exploring given the drug's effect and the trend towards efficacy that has been shown so far. The endogenous nature of the substance has led to multiple hypotheses about its potential role, assuming it even has one. A popular, though minimally supported hypothesis is that it plays a role in dreaming, near-death experiences, or naturally arising spiritual experiences. Other proposals are that it could be an immune system modulator or a tool that helps the brain survive potentially life-threatening conditions. Although it was once posited to be the cause of schizophrenia and other forms of psychosis, that's no longer really supported, but some people still think it could have an impact on psychiatric illness. Even in healthy people, some proposals are that it could regulate mood and anxiety. In each of these cases, we need a lot more research to figure out what it might be doing. One last point to round out this section is that DMT differs from other psychedelics in that it effectively lacks a tolerance. It's possible to use the drug multiple times per day. When inhaled, DMT lasts for 10 to 15 minutes and begins working in under 30 seconds. Some effects may appear by 15 seconds, subsequently building to the full effect within a minute or two. Orally, the duration is 3 to 4 hours, and the onset is 30 to 45 minutes. DMT is the simplest of the common tryptamine hallucinogens. It is structurally similar to melatonin and serotonin. It's also similar to other psychedelics, such as 5-MeO-DMT. The drug is found in other animals and is widespread in the plant kingdom. Among its sources are Psychotria viridis, Diplopteris cabrana, and Mimosa teniflora. Other plants have historically been taken intranasally, but DMT is typically a minor constituent. Ayahuasca is classically made with Banisteriopsis caapi and Psychotria viridis, the latter providing the DMT. Brews sometimes contain other hallucinogenic, stimulating, or otherwise active drugs. This makes ayahuasca a more complex pharmacological substance. After decades of research, we now have pretty good evidence for the endogenous nature of DMT. It's believed to be synthesized beginning with tryptophan, which is used to form tryptamine. An enzyme called N-DMT catalyzes the addition of methyl groups to tryptamine. This leads to N-Dimethyltryptamine and then to DMT. The most important production sites for the drug are unknown. N-DMT is expressed throughout the body, with some high-level areas being the lungs, thyroid, and adrenal gland. Notable levels are also found in the pineal gland. Although this doesn't immediately apply to humans, DMT has been detected in rat pineal gland. The implication of that finding is unclear, and may not be particularly important. DMT's primary mechanisms are serotonin receptor agonism, sigma-1 agonism, and trace amine receptor agonism. Serotonin receptor agonism is probably the most important factor for the psychedelic effects. It binds to many serotonin receptors and is known to be an agonist at 5-HT1A, 5-HT2A, and 5-HT2C. 5-HT2A is likely an important mediator of the psychedelic activity, but other sites could play a role. DMT is known to be a sigma-1 agonist, but how this contributes is still being worked out. This action might play a role in potential neuroprotective effects. Although a role for sigma-1 in psychoactivity hasn't been ruled out, there's more support for physiological effects. It's also not clear if sigma-1 is relevant when DMT is at endogenous levels. DMT has activity at the TAR1 trace amine site. This has been hypothesized to play a role in a regulatory action of endogenous DMT on mood and cognitive functioning. It could also potentially contribute to low-dose DMT's impact on mood. Some of the other effects and contributing mechanisms include the following. DMT has been shown to bind to the serotonin transporter and VMAT2, and metabotropic glutamate receptor 2 might be an important modulatory site for psychedelic activity, since it influences glutamate release. Research has found agonists and antagonists at this site can influence DMT's activity. The drug also leads to a temporary rise in prolactin, growth hormone, and cortisol. Inhalation is the most common route of administration, followed by oral when taken in an ayahuasca-like manner. A light inhalation dose is 10 to 20 milligrams, a common dose is 20 to 40 milligrams, and a strong dose is 40 to 60 milligrams. DMT is typically inactive orally, but it can work when combined with MAOIs, such as the beta-carbolines harmine and harmaline. There are a few groups for the oral preparations. Ayahuasca contains Banisteriopsis caapi and Psychotria viridis. Pharmacology contains DMT on its own, along with MAOIs. And anahuasca, or analog ayahuasca, uses alternative DMT and MAOI plants. Analyses of ayahuasca preparations have found the average 100 milliliter dose of ayahuasca contains 25 to 35 milligrams of DMT. People may use one or more dose. The DMT content in ayahuasca can vary a bit. This is why, at least in some cases, a ceremony leader in the União de Vegetal, a syncretic church that uses ayahuasca, will test a batch before it's given to other members. DMT has at least been taken for centuries, most prominently in South America and the Caribbean in the form of snuffs and ayahuasca-like preparations. There's a record of snuff use dating back millennia, but DMT is typically a minor active drug in those cases. DMT's greatest historical use is in the form of ayahuasca, which has long been taken in regions like Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador. There are accounts as early as the 1700s of caapi on its own or potentially in combination with DMT being used. Most of the reports seem to just involve caapi, which could mean it was being taken for lesser psychoactive reasons or for its emetic and purgative effects. The ayahuasca vine has been widely used in the Amazon for centuries, and DMT-containing brews probably stretch back centuries as well. It's been taken for many reasons, including to receive help from protective spirits, to receive insight into the causes and cures of disease, to see the future, to send messages to other groups, and to prepare for war and hunting. Following Following the European involvement in the Amazon rubber booms, multiple syncretic ayahuasca-using religions appeared in Brazil. They were called União de Vegetal, the UDV, Santo Daime, and Barquina. They blended Brazilian cosmological beliefs, Catholic and European traditions, and other bits of traditional beliefs and knowledge from South America. Santo Daime was the first to appear in the 1930s. It was formed by a Brazilian rubber tapper who encountered the drink through contact with indigenous peoples. Santo Daime became more active internationally and in urban areas after the 1970s. Barquina formed from a split with Santo Daime in 1945, and the UDV was formed in 1961, also by a rubber tapper. DMT was first synthesized in 1931 by Richard Mansky, a Canadian chemist. The first definitive isolation of the drug from a plant was reported in 1955. It came from an Adenanthera peregrina seeds, which were used to prepare snuff. However, at least a partial isolation may have occurred earlier in 1946, when a Brazilian chemist obtained an alkaloid from Mimosa teniflora. That work was followed up in 1959 by American researchers who isolated DMT from Mimosa teniflora root bark with a 0.57% yield. In the 1950s and 1960s, the first reports of endogenously detectable psychoactive tryptamines appeared. Bufotenine was the first to be reported, but DMT and 5-MeO-DMT followed. Stephen Zara, a Hungarian chemist, gave the first report of pure DMT's hallucinogenic effects in 1956. He had synthesized the drug in his lab. This led to him giving it to medical colleagues, dozens of doctors, and eventually some psychotic patients. Even though psychedelics rose into the public consciousness in the 1960s, ayahuasca was largely absent. DMT itself did receive some attention, but it wasn't among the most common psychedelics. A 1966 article from Timothy Leary, Programmed Communication During Experiences with DMT, described the effects. The piece brought the drug to the attention of quite a few people. It included a report from Alan Watts, who was already a popular philosopher by that time. Tests in the 1970s confirmed the drug was not active orally, even when using as much as a gram. Meanwhile, it was shown to be very psychoactive if taken via injection or inhalation. Experiments began to find that taking it orally with an MAOI could make the drug active. For example, a report from Jeremy Bigwood said 100 milligrams of DMT with 86 milligrams of harmaline could yield significant effects. He reported DMT-like hallucinations very similar to a DMT and harmaline-containing ayahuasca brew that I had previously experimented with. Other tests in the 1980s and 1990s found the same. A threshold of around 20 milligrams of DMT was determined, and the ideal amount was considered 30 to 40 milligrams. In discussing Pharmacology, Jonathan Ott, an ethnobotanist, reported good effects with 30 milligrams or more of DMT taken with 120 milligrams of harmine. One of the greatest popularizers of DMT was Terence McKenna during the 1980s and 1990s. He frequently discussed his experiences and was enthusiastic about the drug. In 1992, Brazil legalized the use of ayahuasca following a legal challenge from the UDV. A similar action occurred in the US in 2006, when the Supreme Court ruled the UDV could use their ayahuasca brew despite it containing a Schedule I drug. This was due to the 1993 Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which initially allowed the Native American Church to legally use peyote. Similar legal cases have appeared in other countries. During the 1990s, Rick Strassman began investigating DMT, and he reignited psychedelic research in humans, which had been dead in the US for years. He picked DMT because it was short-acting, naturally occurring, possibly had inadequately explored roles in humans, and was relatively obscure. Hundreds of doses were eventually given to dozens of volunteers. His research and opinions were discussed in the 2000 book, DMT the Spirit Molecule, contributing to the drug's popularization. A documentary by the same name was released in 2010, reaching even more people. During the 2000s and 2010s, interest in the drug increased, partly due to it being discussed by individuals like Rick Strassman, Joe Rogan, and Graham Hancock. Multiple documentaries and videos have been released covering DMT and ayahuasca. This rise in interest led to more people extracting DMT, more people using it, more ayahuasca ceremonies being held in North America, and more people traveling to South America to take the brew. Currently, DMT is not as popular as LSD or psilocybin, but it has become more common in the past couple decades. It is sometimes synthesized, though it's often extracted from plant sources, something that can be done with a minimal biochemistry knowledge. Ayahuasca continues to be used in South America as a plant teacher in medicine. It has spread to many countries around the world and has even received some attention from popular media sources. Ayahuasca retreats are regularly held in Peru, Brazil, and Ecuador. Iquitos, Peru is an especially popular location for ayahuasca. This kind of drug or spiritual tourism has been connected with some negative effects, such as sexual assault, ayahuasca shamans not being adequately paid by promoters, and people receiving brews that actually contain other hallucinogenic plants. DMT is Schedule 1 in the US and is typically an illegal drug around the world. Laws pertaining to plants that contain DMT vary, and those plants are often in a gray area. They might be legal to possess, but extracting DMT from them will usually be illegal. The acute negative effects of DMT are fairly minor, and they're not much of a concern for healthy people. It does put some stress on the cardiovascular system, which should be kept in mind. But the primary acute concerns are psychological, since it can be a very intense and stressful experience, with the potential to be confusing. Those with ongoing psychiatric disorders would be wise to avoid it. It doesn't appear there have been any fatalities from DMT alone. There are some reports of death following ayahuasca use, but they're rare. In those cases, it's also not clear what the exact cause of death was, though it is the case you should generally take even greater precautions with ayahuasca, such as avoiding any other serotonergic drugs. DMT's long-term safety is unknown. Some of the best information we have comes from looking at regular users of ayahuasca, who often take the drug every other week. We don't have nearly enough data from these cases, but it doesn't appear ayahuasca is correlated with any severe health issues. Nevertheless, care should be taken. Some of the risky combinations include tramadol, stimulants like amphetamine and cocaine, and other psychedelics. Other psychedelics typically won't lead to physical health issues in healthy people, but they could raise the chance of problematic psychological experiences. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section. In order for the Drug Classroom to provide more education, support is necessary, and the best way to support is through Patreon at patreon.com/thedrugclassroom. You can also contribute through PayPal or Bitcoin. You can reach me on Twitter at Seth A. Fitzgerald and via email at seth@thedrugclassroom.com. More information and links to references can be found on the TDC website using the link below.